Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to MediaScope's live Friday chat. Today, I'm really pleased to be joined by CEO of the AMAA, Josanne Ryan. Josanne, this week you released is it the inaugural survey? It was the first one?
It is, yes. It's our first one.
And very interesting to see the trends over the years, but we'll talk about that. But Josanne, you're head of the AMAA, so the Australian Measurement...
No, it's the Audited Media Association of Australia. So we audit media, which is a role that supports ad trading, basically. And the tradition started about 80 years ago in print. We also do digital auditing, for our members. But fundamentally, at the moment, we're doing print audit sales, digital sales. We do event, email, and as I mentioned, we do some digital kind of data analytics work for members as well.
Wonderful. And many people might remember it really, the Audit Bureau is perhaps what we've known of it for a long time. And toward the end of our chat, I wanted to ask you about the evolution of the Audit Bureau, because you're right, you're 80 years old. That's just amazing in our industry. But of course, you like any organisation involved in our industry, you've evolved and you've changed. And, this is another step in that evolution, the trust survey that you've released this week. So I want to get a bit of a view on toward the end of how you as an industry organisation are really changing to meet the ongoing needs of the industry.
Yep.
But first of all, let's get started. The question that I first ask everyone as we're doing these chats, really just to anchor the forward conversation, is to get a little bit of an idea of your sort of top-line opinion of how the industry is going. So any challenges, what are the green shoots, just a bit of a top-line view.
Yeah, well, I think what we've seen over the last 6 months is that ad viewability started to become a very hot topic, and agencies are starting to announce that they're trading on viewable impressions. And I think that that's a really interesting area, because the AMAA, or the audits that we do, we're really always about determining opportunity to see for advertising, ensuring that print numbers were legitimate, that advertisers' ads did have an avenue to appear. So viewability is kind of like the digital version of that. And so, I think that, that's a really hot topic, and I think we're going to see more around that. And I know that we're doing some work on that in conjunction with the MFA and obviously the IAB and with our members and the agencies. So that's a really hot topic. I mean, I think that it's a very competitive space. What I'm hearing from our publishers, and we have, publishers from the top end of town all the way through to very small publishers, is that it's a tough marketplace. And I think that what that means is agencies are also working harder for their clients as well. So I don't see that changing. And I think probably the election coming up is meaning that also you often see people kind of slow down a little bit in the pre-election space because they're wondering what's going to happen. So, we've got some interesting dynamics right at the moment, I think.
We absolutely do. And I was at the Ad News Summit yesterday, a really good day, and I'll again talk about that toward the end when we cover off our media week. But yeah, viewability was something that was mentioned often. And as you just pointed to, Josanne, the other big thing was, this election, and it's just been such a long campaign, and business is not making decisions on their marketing, which is impacting us. I think a comment that I've heard quite often recently is when the economy catches a cold, our industry is one of the first industries to catch it also. And I think that that's kind of we're certainly very buoyed at the moment by election advertising. There's no doubt about that. Probably also getting a little bit of a lift from the US election and the Olympics a little later in the year. But what's going to happen after that, I'm not too sure. I think it's going to be very interesting. But again, we'll touch on that when we're talking about our Media Week. Let's now have a look at the Media Data Trust Survey that you put out. If you can just first of all just give us a bit of background. How did you produce it? What was involved? What was the reasoning behind it, and so on?
Well, I joined the AMAA 12 months ago, and in looking at what we currently do, the services that we provide to the publishers in the industry, we kind of obviously recalibrated what our vision is, what our key goals are, and what is it that, the key outtake of what we deliver. And in the end, what came out of that was it's all about accountability and it's about trust. So we were very keen to actually be able to calibrate what trust means now, because it's changing shape. And I think, an election kind of brings up a whole lot of trust factors for people as well, because do we trust politicians? Who do we trust these days? It's a really, I think, big issue, and yet we take a certain level of trust for granted every day in everything that we do, and also in the industry we take for granted certain levels of trust. So we started off by doing focus groups in agencies, really centering around ad trading, the data that they use, where does the circulation data, for instance, that we generate, how is that used, and where does that sit within their kind of system. Then we did an online survey to kind of calibrate the results. So the online survey was 315 marketers and media agencies, split evenly, and pretty much split evenly between senior and sort of mid-level junior as well. So we got a really solid range within that sample. And the indicators were really interesting, actually. Some really interesting things came out of it. So we asked, with regard to data, as we all know, there's a heap of data these days. Everybody, in some ways, is overloaded with data, I think. And in some of the kind of one-on-one conversations we had with marketers, a few of them said, I feel like I'm flying blind. I almost can't keep up with the change, the pace of change, the level of data. Understanding the metrics becomes very difficult. And I think we probably would all agree with that, because there's always, there's new metrics, there's a lot of metrics. And so the agencies have a big task as well around evaluation and using that data. So, but we looked at three key layers, and that was the channel itself, and we did, 13 channels. The channel itself, how trusted, verified, and safe is it as an advertising vehicle? We looked at audience data, so what is the audience and what are the insights and behaviours around that audience? What sort of data are the agencies using on that? Like, how do they trust that data? And the third one was ROI, so performance of campaigns. So the really interesting things that came out of that, and I'll just give you a few top lines, and then you can ask me any questions that you have. So with the sort of channel data, meaning how safe is it for a marketer's messaging, what came up was the traditional media are still sitting up their tops with agencies. So we saw that TV sat at a rating of 7.1. Print was just behind that at 6.9. Online display, and that excludes programmatic display, that was even to print. So, premium publishers, their online display is still trusted and safe because those channels are very governed. What we saw that was agencies. What we saw with marketers is they actually put print first. So they had a slightly lower rating scale that we came in at 6.6, but that was great. And also the traditional media was sitting very close behind print. So where we saw the gap, or the bit of trust gap in channel, was in actually programmatic mobile and online video. So they all sat below 5. So there really was a bit of a deficit in trust around those channels in terms of safety. And I think that's no surprise, given that we know programmatic has an inventory pool that can pull from anywhere. And there are levels of fraud within that inventory pool. In Australia, it's not as big as overseas, but it's still there. And I think it's been acknowledged by the IAB that it sits between 5 and 7% at their current estimation. I think with mobile, the mobile data is very new. And I think perhaps, that channel, they're still grappling with how do we use that channel? How do we evaluate that channel? And I think that's the same for online video. So what it kind of said was the agencies still have a little bit of uncertainty about those channels with regard to safety. With audience data, we ended up where that ended up was online display was tops for agencies. So they're getting a lot of data for digital. You know, digital is great in that way. Let's face it, it's created a data revolution for our industry. TV was second and social media was number 3 in terms of audience data. All of the traditional media sat in a bundle in the middle. So print, programmatic, radio were all even, sitting in kind of a middle line. Mobile, again, in audience data was seen, you know, kind of the one that dropped out a little bit. It was still above 5, but it was at 5.3. So, you know, they're still waiting for perhaps better data on mobile. With marketers, what they said was online video, social media and search. And interestingly, mobile came up on their kind of top 4. Now, I think that implies that they're rating the channels that they're using as owned channels a little bit higher because they're more conversant with the data, they're more comfortable and they're exploring those channels more. So they still rated the traditional media solidly, very similarly to agencies. It's just that the top ones were the ones they're exploring in or using in their own as owned assets. With ROI, I mean, I think data, you know, digital data really does kind of lead in the ROI stakes. There's no doubt about that. And I think, you know, offline media is a little bit more challenged in the ROI stakes, even though agencies obviously are investing heavily in, you know, econometric modeling and evaluation tools. I think the digital data still came out on top. But so there, what came up was sort of the top 3 for agency was online display, programmatic, social, and TV. TV came in at number 4. So TV is still seen as kind of being able to give them performance. So it still works, I guess, is the truth. In this country, TV is pretty solid, still gets solid audiences. And the marketers were saying search, online video, and online display were their top 3. For ROI, being able to calibrate ROI through data. Now, that doesn't mean that other channels weren't seen as delivering ROI. What it says is they've got better data around ROI from those channels. So the other really interesting thing that came up for us around the metrics was that we asked about the key metrics that are delivered you know, across the key channels, I guess. So we surveyed ABC, which is one of our brands. That's the paid consumer sales brand, and the CAB, which is the free title audit brand. But we also asked them about Google Analytics, Nielsen, OzTam, AMAA, Move, GfK, and Roy Morgan in terms of how well do they trust that data. And a lot of those are very traditional brands that have been in audience measurement for many years. And I think you can see where there's been a brand around for a long time, it does get a bit more cred. But interestingly, and I thought this was very heartening for us at the ABC because we've been around for 80 years, was that the ABC kind of brand came up strongest with agencies. So there's a knowledge of it and there's a high trust factor in it because it is verified data. You know, it's independently verified. Interestingly, marketers, Google Analytics is their top. So that's their top brand. But, you know, they're using Google Analytics endlessly, let's face it. And it's ubiquitous. Everybody's using Google Analytics. So that kind of, when you put it into context, that's not really surprising. And the rest of them, you know, so what we had was ABC was at sort of 6.8, Google was 6.9, Roy Morgan was 6.5, Nielsen, OzTam were 6.4, CAB, AMAA, Move, and GfK were all kind of in one bundle. So all of the brands sat within, you know, 2 percentage points, though, 1.5 percentage points. So we're not talking huge differentials, but we are, you know, I guess the solid thing for our brands, the ABC and CAB, was they're certainly in the mix and they're certainly valued by the agencies. So that was, I think, a solid finding for us. And the other finding was that we know that if data is audited, it does boost the trust factor because we asked around, you know, audited print and unaudited print, and it almost doubled the trust factor if the data was verified. So I think for us, the kind of the takeout about that is that it has implications for the market going forward in terms of how do we want to use verified data? Where do we want to verify? Where do we want to put accountability? Where do we want to shine that light to actually give a bit more trust in the data that we use? That is, it's the decisions made for marketers, millions of dollars of spend, billions in this market.
Yes.
So it's pretty important, I think, that as an industry, we think about how much integrity we want around that and how we approach that moving forward, because the digital ecosystem, as we all know, is a lot more opaque. And there are areas of it that we're still grappling with. And I mean, we've talked about viewability. Kind of viewability is one of those. I think ad fraud is another one that overseas they're really honing in on because it's huge in the States. I think it's been calibrated to be $7 billion is lost in advertising revenue in the States in digital ad fraud. So, and if that's a marker for where we may head, then we've kind of got to start thinking about that now and not let it get away from us. And the other thing is, brand safety for digital. Whilst I know agencies monitor all of this for their clients, and I'm not at all beginning to say that they don't, but everyone is using different frameworks for that. And with brand safety, how safe is digital? Do marketers really feel that that's totally covered off? And I think that, I guess for us here at the AMAA, we're hooked into the international body of audit bureaus, the IFABC. And lucky me, I get to go on a conference next month in Switzerland to talk to them about all of these issues because they are moving overseas on kind of industry frameworks around best practice and governance for some of these areas. And it's purely about building trust, that not only do the standards exist, but that there's an application of them that's consistent, that the industry endorses and that the industry, I guess, values, So I think there's scope for this market to mature in that way. So, there's frameworks in place for print, and certainly there's tech providers doing a lot of this validation in the digital space. But at the moment, there aren't any best practice industry frameworks for that. And that's what we're seeing overseas. And I guess that is something that, from this trust report, we kind of point to that the industry has a chance now to kind of collaborate and take those next steps over the next, 12 months, 18 months. I think, on that topic of viewability, Denise, what came up in our little survey was that it was a really key issue for agencies over the next 12 months for them to address. What was interesting was marketers themselves don't put it as high as the agencies. So I think what that points to is the agencies are the ones that understand the whole viewability conundrum because it is complex. And marketers are relying on their agencies to address that for them. And I think, whilst we've had agencies come out saying, 100% trading on viewability, I think that that's a probably not an ideal, that's a tough ask for some scenarios. But I think that will remain a hot topic over the next, sort of 12 months in terms of how agencies begin to determine how they want to govern that for their clients, and the clients are looking to them to do it.
And certainly yesterday at the Ad News Summit, again, viewability, ad fraud, ad blocking, all big topics, and they're big topics that have now been very actively in the market now for, 6+ months. So that's perhaps that in some ways reflected in the results of the survey. I think it's really interesting that TV and some of those, and print came up so highly, and some of the more traditional medias came up so highly. I mean, are we still in a market where that perception of that tangible, we can tangibly feel it and see it, rather than digital, still kind of holds some weight, and that perhaps is reflected in the survey a little bit?
I think that's probably true. I mean, I think marketers used to always trust channels or veer towards channels that they were familiar with and they liked. We've always kind of known that. And I think there is a comfort factor in seeing your ad appear on TV, you know, or being able to pick up a glossy magazine and you see your ad, you know. I think there's that, but I also think that the traditional channels have had plenty of time to actually establish monitoring and oversight. And probably in fairness, it's been easier with those channels because it's more self-evident, you know, when they're running the ads. So, I mean, interestingly, marketers still on our kind of survey in terms of key areas over the next 12 months that they are focused on, proof of performance and proof of posting the ad were the top two that they listed. So, you know, they still care, they still want to know they need to have comfort in the fact that the ad really appears. You know? So yes, I think that the traditional channels have been able to do that and they've had frameworks set up. You know, TV gets monitored for, you know, ads being posted, etc. You almost can't, you don't do that in the same way with digital, even though, you know if it's not performing because you won't get the performance at the end, at the back end of the, you know, the clicks, the etc. The activity isn't there. But
do you think the complexity of the digital media landscape, I mean, you know, acronyms, a lot of vendors, again, that was touched on yesterday at the Ad News Summit. I mean, it is by far the most measurable media, but there's so many different ways that you can measure it, and there's so many different businesses that do offer that level of measuring. Lots of acronyms, lots of players all saying that they're the best and they're the best and so on. Do you think that, I mean, to me, that probably adds perhaps to that feeling of mistrust?
Yeah, I think that is something that really kind of creates an additional layer of complexity. There's no doubt because, you know, even with, you know, viewability, a different provider will measure it differently. So, I mean, I think there's lots of things that can be done though to actually build trust and to actually kind of perhaps demystify some of that. So, you know, for instance, the ABC UK, which is our sister body over there, they have actually, you know, produced a detailed report across 5 viewability vendors that they accredit, and they list how they measure viewability differently so that at least you can actually kind of look to it as a guide as to how a different tech might work. And they've taken that step of accrediting some so that the industry can go, oh, okay, these ones are accredited. So, I mean, I think there's probably scope for that direction to happen here. You know, I think with ad fraud, for instance, it's a really huge issue. What was the sentiment around ad fraud yesterday at the event?
Viewability seemed to be the king over ad fraud. I think the general sentiment is that it's great that we're finally talking about these issues at last.
Yes.
And that really has only come, we've all known that these have been issues for a long time, but it's really perhaps only in the last 6+ months that we've actually started talking about it as an industry. And I think that that's a really positive step. Yeah. If you brought it up prior to that, then, you know, you were kind of, I don't know, not pariahed, but you were certainly, you know, you didn't seem to get much of a voice. So I think it's wonderful that at last we're talking about it because, of course, the next step to that, to talking about it and recognising it is we start to talk about some solutions. So certainly the sentiment is that some of the problems perhaps discussed overseas aren't a bigger problem for us here. But this is where I'll again put my certainly with ad blocking, which is a problem. This is where I'll perhaps put my NBN hat on for just a moment, that NBN woman, for just a moment, and say that when people have difficulty in speed and downloading data, one of the first things they'll do is look at how they can lighten the data download, and of course taking away those ads is a very obvious spot. So yet another reason why in Australia we really need to get our act together on this digital connectivity and this NBN, because we need to deliver our ads. as an industry. And if that's going to be difficult because of our internet connectivity, then that's going to impact us again.
Totally. No, you're totally right. I mean, I think you're on the ball there around the whole, fact that the industry is now beginning to actually have a conversation about the issues. Because when I came on board last year, when I was speaking to people in market, there wasn't the same kind of approach around it. In fact, when I was trying to kind of say, well, overseas, this is happening and this is happening, what do you think might happen here? Everybody was kind of, oh, yeah, that's very interesting, but, we're not moving in that direction. And then bang, it's like suddenly that sentiment has completely changed, which is actually very good. It's great because it actually paves the way for the industry to collaborate and determine what steps we want to put in place, or what frameworks and what processes are going to work for our industry here. And it may not be the same as what's been adopted overseas, but we can utilise best practice from the UK and the US to see, what can work. So I think that, and I think your point about ad blocking is totally right as well, because we know that people do that. They block it because the speed that, the ads load first. So, if they can, if they can block those, then their content will load.
And there's certainly issues. Tony Sims has just put a question to us, Josanne, you can probably see that. Does stalking and pestering behaviour of digital media destroy the trust? To me, partly it's about creative. If the creative's good and the creative is delivering a good message to you, then it's not seen so much as pestering, it's seen as helpful. We know as an industry that we have some way to go in the creative sector of our industry, meeting the targeting capabilities of or the increasing targeting capabilities of digital. Hopefully those things will come together a little bit more. But I want relevance. It's a question of relevance. If we can just touch on a couple of points, the differences between, and as you said, you surveyed two sectors of our market, so you surveyed the marketers and the media agencies. If we can just maybe drill down a little bit into what those key differences were.
I think the key differences were really around the trust levels. There were just kind of slightly different calibrations around different channels. I think what we were seeing, as I mentioned in kind of the audience data, you were seeing those channels that marketers are familiar with and they're using as own channels come up strongly. I think overall, we were seeing the traditional media perform very well. It was just that in the, proof of performance, that's where digital starts to kind of take a lead there. And I think across the board, what we were seeing is, mobile wasn't rating so well because the data is very new and fresh. And I think one of the key things, was that kind of lack of channel trust in programmatic, really, mainly as a safe channel, not in data in audience, because it does deliver a lot of information, obviously, but, there is that bit of lack of trust there. I mean, interestingly, when we asked around which channels were most in need of oversight, what came up was digital across the board for marketers and agencies. So that's in terms of oversight to build trust. And then, so we asked people who said, yes, digital needs more oversight, what aspects of digital, and what came up was programmatic. So, 42% of the agency sample said programmatic. The next one was, was mobile. And with marketers, it was social media. So, I think with social media, that the context of that might be that they need oversight over social media as well in terms of moderating, because social media allows a strong, a voice for the consumer, which is fantastic, but it can be tough for marketers.
And as someone actually made the point yesterday, it's a social platform, it's not an advertising platform. So perhaps some issue, I think there's still some issues to play out on the social media space in general. A couple of the points that I picked up on when I was looking at the survey results, it seemed to me that if we look at revenue projections, so advertising channel revenue projections, we're kind of at odds with the trust factor. So, you know, anything that you look at in regard to fall, or, you know, the upward trend in regard to revenue, advertising spend, mobile always comes up tops, programmatic always comes up tops, print, obviously, print and magazine in decline. It just seemed to me that where the revenue forecasts are very much at cross purposes of where the trust is. So how do you, to me also, perhaps trust in programmatic has something to do with the knowledge and the skill level. So I don't trust it because I don't know it. So
I think one of the marketers actually said that in one of the quotes that we kind of use in our presentation, is that, you know, if they understood more how it worked, they'd actually be able to, you know, work with their agencies around how they want accountability applied. So I think there is that thing of they don't understand what's under the hood.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I think there is certainly a disconnect in terms of trust in channels, safety of channels, and where the revenue's going. And I think, in a way, that's our love affair with digital and with digital data. You know, I mean, PwC is saying that, you know, 51% of ad spend will be digital by, you know, 2018, and that's a huge chunk. And I think, you know, probably the traditional media and print itself has had a tough road, you know, given this transition to digital. So, you know, and we can really blame, I guess, or thank, you know, the smartphone, because we have one of these with us everywhere now. And so the way we access information has just completely changed. That doesn't mean that we don't love to sit with a beautiful magazine, but we do it probably less frequently. And also, you know, we've got a ubiquitous supply of information coming at us all the time that we can pick up in the coffee queue or, you know, anywhere. So I think behavioural changes have meant that the dollars are following where the consumer is attracted. But the publishers are adapting to that. You know, they're you know, sharing their content across a lot of platforms, and you know, that's the exciting part for them, although the business model is very different. So, you know, I think, you know, there's, as we know, transformation can be a tough game. And so that's one of the things that we're seeing play out. I do think, though, given that premium publishers have the safest channels for digital, and that really shows up in the trust factors, that, you know, that should mean that money really goes through those safe channels. So, you know, private exchanges, which the big publishers have. And I think there's still, you know, all of those areas that the publishers are working on, the native content and the wonderful context and content that they deliver is so rich that I think, you know, that needs to be acknowledged as well. So even though there is that shift from print to digital, hopefully what we're seeing is a lot of it go into those traditional channels that are those traditional publishers that are delivering that fantastic content that we're used to having, you know, within those wonderful brands, the SMH, you know, the Daily Telly, the Australian Women's Weekly, all of those fantastic brands that we're always looking to for that great content.
I think that's real. I mean, again, that's something else I'm picking up in the market of late. And particularly, you know, the headwinds are kind of looking a little bumpy ahead in terms of the economy. So advertisers perhaps will start to go back to those more trusted mediums and start to perhaps look a little bit more at building their brand. I did kind of think in the back of my head when that is brought up that that's probably a little opposite to what happened during the GFC, when advertisers, there was a flight to performance because brand dollars were kind of in decline a little bit. So I think it will be interesting to see how that plays out, but completely take your point on the private exchanges. And indeed, we're seeing those pop up more and more for some of our major brands. And indeed, Josanne, as you would know, we're perhaps seeing some previous foes become friends. which I think is also a really interesting development, particularly in as we've got these two huge behemoths in our market now, being Google and Facebook. So we don't have any but choice but to perhaps collaborate and sort of band together. We've not really spoken about outdoor or radio. Are there any particular comments that you can make on them?
Well, look, I think, outdoor rated pretty well along with the traditional channels. Outdoor in terms of trust was really in the top 5, as a channel. So, it's a very visible channel, and I think marketers feel very comfortable with it, and I think in terms of even the audience data, they've done a great job of marketing themselves, because even though it's a harder task for them to actually calibrate audience, they've done pretty well in it. It sits in terms of marketers, they rated it, radio and outdoor similarly. Probably they were at the bottom tier of marketers, but they weren't really at the bottom tier of agencies. So, outdoor sat, just behind, programmatic radio and print. So programmatic radio and print got 5.9 in terms of audience data trust, and outdoor got 5.7, which it was, the same as online video. So, I think they've done a pretty good job. And in ROI, they were sitting amongst the traditional media, so they did quite well. They did. They performed in the mid band, and pretty trusted as a channel. So,
and certainly I would think outdoor particularly. Outdoor to me at the moment is, they're really transitioning quite well to digital. Some digital innovation. They've obviously got their move metric, which has come in. So they've really made some quite good inroads. Any forward trend that you see, there always seems to be a bit of an uptick in the outdoor sector. Not as much as digital, but every time I see an uptick in digital, always I think, yes, but most of that uptick goes to Google and to Facebook. And I think that that's something that isn't often brought up when we're talking about, where we're seeing the success in the digital space. That is really interesting, the whole report. And as I said, I'll be really interested now to follow the forward trends to see how that evolves and changes. But I think it's a wonderful initiative that you've put in place, Josanne. So well done. Certainly when I'm highlighting our chat today, I'll certainly have a space where MediaScope's audience can download and have a better look at the report. First of all, I just wanted to touch first of all on the different media metrics. So you mentioned the metrics that you put in place. There's also, of course, GFK, Move, as I said, OzTam, multiple from AMAA and so on. How did they, just a quick overview of how they all played out.
This was the one that I mentioned a little earlier, so we'll just recap. So that was where the ABC metric came out top for agencies, but where you have AMAA and Move sitting very close together at about 5.5. GFK was 5.6. So, they're very similar. Nielsen online ratings, 6.4. OzTam, 6.4. Roy Morgan, 6.5. We did this survey before they just released their last wave of cross-channel measurement for Roy Morgan. And Google was 6.9. So, there's a small margin. There's not a lot of difference in it. I think the industry is very well serviced in data in a lot of ways. And, the agencies, a couple of agencies said to me, could you put more brands on there next time? More media brands. And I said, more measurement brands. We can look at it. But, there's quite a lot now when you look at all of the platforms that deliver data. So, all of the data metrics came up, quite strongly in a band, and ABC also came out strongly. And that was the one where Google Analytics kind of came out, quite strongly with marketers because they are using it. I mean, everyone's using Google Analytics.
And that ROI and that attribution through the customer journey. I seem to be hearing that a lot at the moment. So perhaps that, there's some kind of tools that could be added in next year, but, any survey evolves in line with the market, but I love seeing the trends, because I think they always tell such an interesting story once you get a few years under your belt.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. I mean, I think the interesting thing for us in doing this was that we were able to kind of calibrate some relativities around trust, which was really interesting, in those slight differences between marketers and agencies. And it tended to imply that agencies have a knowledge base that's very in-depth with metrics and data, and marketers are coming at it from a different angle, really. And I think that showed up as well in the things that they consider most important over the next 12 months, because marketers, it was very much proof of performance, and ad posting. Whereas for agencies, it was very much, ad viewability, and cross-media audience metrics, which is the holy grail, which we know, because we can get, cross-device metrics now, but to actually get full attribution across a complete channel mix for a campaign is still the holy grail, because offline and online, the attribution between them is still, to some degree, not easily measured.
That's still our industry's nirvana.
Yeah, exactly. And that came up, and I think that came up really strongly in the focus groups we did in agencies as well, because we were saying to them, what would you like to see? If there was something we could give you, what would it be? And it came up as cross, channel measurement. So, I mean, they're all working on that themselves, the agencies, and they've all got their own kind of modeling in that space, but there is no kind of industry metric for it, because it's very difficult. And as you would know, Denise, there's a huge amount of money that gets invested in these metrics. They are not simple things, whether it be through AMAA or OzTam or Nielsen or, Move. There's a lot of development time, a lot of money, a lot of ongoing development to keep it, up to speed with the changes in the market. And so I think, if we do this again, in 12 months' time, there'll have been changes in some of those metrics.
Absolutely. I hope so. And that's, as you said, one of the things that I hear often in the market, and was highlighted to you in the survey, that this is one of the challenges of all of us working in the market, is keeping up with such a fast-moving industry, to say the least. One thing that you did mention to me when we had the pre-chat, and I think you touched on it before as well, you're going on your nice conference to Switzerland, but you really kind of recognise that the Australian market, we've got some room to do something a little bit different and to perhaps collaborate. Is this, from the survey that you've taken now, is that really the next step now? Are you talking to other industry organisations about what you can do to better collaborate and to really, I suppose, meet the needs that some of the respondents in your survey highlighted?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole time that I've been on board here in the last year, I have been talking to the other industry bodies and determining what they consider to be the most important things and where they think the industry will move. In the UK, they have a number of really, they're getting quite advanced now on their frameworks, their best practice frameworks. So, for instance, they have a brand safety framework that is audited and so programmatic desks and ad exchanges are accredited with being brand safe. So they sign up to a set of principles of how they operate, and then they agree to use an appropriate tech tool to either have a whitelist, blacklist, and to monitor where ads land within the channel. And so the ABC, our counterpart, goes in and then sort of verifies that is in place and working as it should. And they give them a tick to say, yes, you're accredited to actually be operating in a brand safe manner for your client's money. And I mean, that now has, 31, they have 31 signatories across, the programmatic desks, the Vivakeys, Axis, a whole AOL, a whole kind of, I can't rattle off the names for you, Denise, I have them here. I could.
But there's MediaScope, Josanne, I'll show you.
You'll have to go to ABC, JICWebs, I think, or ABC UK, and they're all on their website. But, you know, I was really impressed with how many they now have on board, you know, because I've been watching this over the last 12 months. It was already in place when I joined the AMAA, and I've been speaking with the, you know, the other industry bodies around this as well. But, you know, it's growing, and the support of that has not gone away. They're continuing to get more, you know, exchanges and programmatic desks on board, because the industry is on board to be able to say, yes, I'm working within the best framework possible for my client.
Yep, excellent.
And I think that what's happening also in the UK is they've now done the same framework for fraud. So, you know, they've put in place best practice principles around fraud. They've put in place a taxonomy, and now they're setting up a framework where agencies and trading desks can be sort of, you know, accredited to adopting these best practice principles. And so that framework's a little different in the UK than it is in the US. So if you're familiar with the US, there's a new group set up, which the IAB are on board with. And I should say, in both those markets, you know, the industry bodies kind of join together. So, you know, the IAB, the agency body like our MFA, you know, the AANA, or in the States it's the ANA, and in the UK it's ISBA. I'm sorry, it's acronym city.
Yeah.
I just, you know, I'm just rattling off these acronyms. But anyway, the point is they have joined forces, all of the industry bodies, to actually figure out what works. So the UK has set up those frameworks, and what we're seeing in the US is that, you know, the Trust Accountability Group, which is, you know, the IAB, the ANA, which is the advertiser body, and the 4As, which is the agency industry body, have come together to set up this Trust Accountability Group. And I think that they're just going gangbusters. You know, it was only set up last year. They've now got this anti-piracy pledge, which they have, as an industry, said they do not want advertising dollars supporting piracy. So I think that's really important, and we've done nothing on that here, which I think is a pity, and I think it's an opportunity.
Is there much impetus to get? Is there much kind of impetus to get that happening here?
Look, there has been around, you know, Music Rights Australia has been, you know, in contact with us for quite a while, and very keen for the industry to actually get on board with them to try to address advertising dollars leaking in and supporting pirate sites, because it does happen. We don't know how much money in Australia goes there, but, you know, nonetheless, it does happen. So, you know, I think there's an opportunity for us to do more in that space. And, you know, in the US, what you're seeing is Disney, Warner Brothers, 20th Century Fox have all joined this anti-piracy pledge because, you know, it's in their interest to protect their content. But there's also, I think, nearly $500 million worth of ad dollars that they know just end up leaking into sites that, you know, they shouldn't be on. So that our anti-piracy pledge has a lot of the big agency groups on it. I know Group M are on that. You know, I think there's a whole bunch of agencies. So Group M, Horizon, Maxis Global, Mediacom, Mindshare, MEC, Neo at Ogilvy, Starcom, MediaVest Group, Vivakeys, Axis, and Zenith Opti. Last look, that was, you know, who had signed up to the anti-piracy pledge. So that's a really big initiative over there. The other thing that is happening in the States through the Trust Accountability Group is that in order to stop this fraud problem that they have, and they do have a big fraud problem, so they estimate about 30% of ad dollars are leaking out to fraudulent impressions or fraudulent activity. So they are setting up a program where you have to have a tag ID to actually trade. So you have to be verified as a business. So I think you know, that will mean that if you don't have a tag ID, you're not considered a legitimate supplier of inventory. Therefore, your fraudulent inventory won't be able to get into the trading pool. So you wouldn't be able to get through to a programmatic desk, for instance, with your inventory. I mean, I think that's a really solid step. It's a pretty dramatic step because they've got so much fraud. And I'm not suggesting we should do that here. But I mean, I think, you know, for marketers, dependent on how much fraud there really is, do you really want to lose 7 or 10% of your revenue, of your money to fraud? You know, and if it ends up being that much, what do we do about it as an industry to kind of step up and try and govern that? You know, I mean, I know that the agencies will say there's tech that can weed out fraud, and I totally agree with them. Yes, there's a lot of innovation around that, but are we doing it as well as we can? You know, and do we need to shine more of a spotlight on that moving forward?
I mean, in light of what you've just said, Josanne, it just seems kind of, I don't know, it seems to me that this issue should be out front a little bit more, and we should be on the front step of this issue a little bit more.
Absolutely, Denise. And I think there's nothing wrong with us starting, you know, we're all talking about viewability, and I'm working with the MFA around what's going on overseas and feeding back to them information, and we'll continue to work on that. But I think it would be good if we also start thinking about the other things, because if we start talking about them now and elevating those discussions and that collaboration, then we'll be in a good place to put frameworks in place to support what we want, you know, and that is an accountable and transparent trading ecosystem that weeds out as much as possible of any of these issues.
And that gives us a strong foundation for the future. I mean, that just makes complete sense to me. And again, Josanne, I really congratulate you on this initiative. As we spoke about earlier, the Audit Bureau, or the AMAA, is an 80-year-old institute or organisation. So I think it's wonderful that you're evolving and changing and really meeting the changing and, you know, quite fast-moving needs of the market. So a really great initiative. And, you know, this time next year, hopefully we can have another live chat, and we'll talk about the 2-year trends that we're starting to see.
Absolutely. And if as things come to fruition and things come up, I'm happy to chat again, Denise.
Right.
If anybody wants to get the white paper on 10 insights on trust in the media industry, just go to the AMAA website. So that's auditedmedia.org.au. And
I'll link to that when I put this replay up on MediaScope's site later this afternoon. This is the time that I now want to just have a quick chat about our Media Week. And I might go first and just sort of say that I went to the Ad News Summit yesterday. Always a really good day out at the Randwick race track. So that I think they get us out there where we can't escape. There's nowhere to go really. So we're kind of stuck with each other for a day. Always wonderful to see, you know, old colleagues, meet some new colleagues, and indeed get the views of the day. I think during our chat, I've spoken about a few things that were mentioned, but certainly the increasing flight to owned and earned media was very much spoken about. Viewability certainly came up, but indeed also that, you know, a lot of people were saying the shift also to more trusted media. Or more traditional medias, particularly in a sort of a more difficult economic forecast. And of course that means print and magazine, also means TV. Perhaps it was the print, magazine and TV people saying that, Josanne. I probably shouldn't say that. But, you know, wonderful to get their views, but, you know, a good networking day as well. I'll just give a bit of a shout out to my T-shirt sponsor today, which is Advi. They launched their Unibrief product at the summit yesterday. I'll turn around and give the name there. 2 really nice guys out of Brisbane that have really recognised a problem in our market, and, you know, got off their backsides and done something about it, and launched a product yesterday at Ad News, and I'm super impressed with it. It's basically an automated briefing product between publisher and agency.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, you know, that efficiency that I think as an industry we all struggle with. We're time poor, the market's incredibly fragmented. They, of course, you know, they're from our industry, they recognise this problem, and they, you know, did something that not too many people do. They actually then did something about it. So really impressed with it. and I'm really pleased to wear their T-shirt today. They actually had a ping pong table set up there yesterday, so I had a couple of games with an Olympic ping pong player who they brought out. So they did it. They actually did it really well, I think.
How did you fare? Did they win or you?
I actually got a few little hits in. I know that he was very much going light on me, but I had a go, Josanne. I had a go.
I was very sorry to miss that day. I couldn't go because I had a board meeting, and otherwise I would have been there. So interesting to hear the feedback about it. I'll be following some of the stuff that they report from it.
There was only a few of us tweeting, but certainly Ad News have got a couple of articles today that cover it, and there's probably a few. I always think the tweets are quite interesting to follow as well. That's when you get a little bit of a deeper insight into what went on. I also just wanted to finish off, I also wanted to highlight the NBN. It just exploded last night. It exploded in front of my eyes as the Australian Federal Police raided Senator Stephen Conroy's office. They also raided several Labor minister staffers about some leaks that occurred in Delimiter, Australian Financial Review and the Sydney Morning Herald last year and even earlier this year. It's firmly put the NBN on as an election issue, perhaps not in the way that many of us were hoping it would become an election issue, but at least it has got it out in the open. Again, through the open letter that I put live about 6 weeks ago to our industry, there's a lot of behind-the-scenes discussion going on about the impact that a very substandard NBN or internet connectivity will have in our industry. And indeed, all of the industry organisations are currently talking together, which, as you know, Josanne, is no mean feat, to say the least.
Absolutely.
But talking together about how we as an industry can really address this major issue, which will have a major impact on us, and our need to build business models, reach our audiences, and so on. So I will keep everyone as posted as I can. But overall, I wanted to say thank you very much for joining us. It's been a really interesting chat, and I really appreciate your support and the initiative that you've shown in doing this study too.
Thanks, Denise. Really enjoyed it. Happy to come on anytime.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us as well. I'll just hang up now for Jose. I'll just turn the recording off.